Hope. Here we are together on the eve of Election Day 2020 in the United States of America. It seems like a particularly critical moment for us to ask, what is hope? 2020 has been a year fraught with enormous challenges, uncertainty, and instability. We're in the midst of a momentous election that will shape the future of this country, battling a global pandemic that has brought us to our knees. Unrelenting, inhumane racial injustice, police brutality, and exploitation of our most vulnerable has sparked protests for change more powerful than anything we have seen in generations. Planet Earth's viability as an environment to sustain life hangs in the balance. For each of us personally, and for all of us collectively, hope is essential. Where there's hope, there is possibility. We are in motion, and the future awaits. Hope is not only a noun, something you have, but it's also a verb and an action. Hope is not longing, because longing is tied up in waiting. Hope is not about waiting. It is about activating the imagination to move towards change. The ability to hope is to believe in a future, our future, and the future of our children and our children's children. The ability to hope means recognizing you have power, which you always do, because power enables choice and choice enables change. One of the powers of this new setting is that we can at once be in conversation and simultaneously offer individual thoughts and viewpoints via chat. So I'd like to ask, what is hope for you? How are you activating hope? And if you feel like sharing, we welcome your responses in the chat right now for all to see. For me, I'm activating hope by voting. I already did. And by continuing a practice of kindness. I see many of you are already participating in the chat, and it will stay open for your thoughts throughout the evening. Thank you for joining in that way. Jane Hirshfield is a Buddhist, an American poet, and an essayist. This is an excerpt from her poem, The Weighing. So few grains of happiness measured against all the dark, and still the scales balance. The world asks of us only the strength we have, and we give it. Then it asks more, and we give it. For those who are joining for the first time, 10 Questions is a course offered by UCLA School of the Arts and Architecture, and simultaneously a public platform for thoughtful engagement with our extended community. We're here together because of our shared resourcefulness, resilience, and extraordinary adaptability. It's here with you that 10 Questions brings together the treasured resources of the university, our teachers, our students, and our community, to build capacity in this time of urgent need and great precarity. The format for this evening will include a 10-minute presentation from each of our panelists, followed by a conversation amongst them. Our students will then immediately gather in small group discussions in Zoom breakout rooms, and everyone else will remain here in the webinar for a very special presentation from Marina Del Rey Middle School Down students who have created their own response to tonight's question. We'll then welcome our students back and finish out the evening in a Q&A with our esteemed guests. So, our first panelist tonight is Ramesh Srinivasan, who is a professor in the Information Studies and Design Media Arts Department at UCLA and the founder of the UC-wide Digital Cultures Lab. Ramesh served as a national surrogate for Senator Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign on issues of technology policy and currently serves as an innovation policy advisor to Biden-Harris. His research investigates technology's relationship to democracy and politics, public health, policy, social change, economic development, distance learning, migration studies, and cultural heritage. Welcome, Ramesh.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Okay, I wanted to just express my thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. My thanks to UCLA Arts, who really knows how to put on professional events, and my incredible honor at joining the two esteemed guests who are joining me tonight, who will be presenting with me tonight, Tananarive and the great Herbie Hancock, who I grew up listening to. So this I feel this in an emotional and a spiritual way, as well as an academic and political way. And I just got to feel the burn message too. That makes me feel good. So my work is really focused on a major task of how we can humanize digital technology, how we can humanize, everything from AI to mobile phones to social media to algorithms, all of which, as we all know, are increasingly central in our politics, in our cultural lives, in our economic lives, and so much more. I'm really hopeful, given the examples that I'll be sharing, but a lot of those examples are responses to concerns that I have, that many of us have, of an internet that is asymmetric, that is dominated by private corporations. And so I invite you all to engage in a dialogue with me via Twitter. My handle is up there on the top left, and to check out some of these ideas in my last book, which is called Beyond the Valley. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this might be a somewhat small slide, but I'll explain it. I wonder how many of you know that the internet was originally publicly funded, that we, the taxpayers, paid through our taxes funding for the underlying infrastructure that became the internet. But as we all know, the wealthiest companies in the history of the world are internet companies that all built themselves up on top of that infrastructure. And that is a very common pattern in this country that I believe we can do something about, and we should do something about, which is all of the costs are socialized, we pay for everything, and all of the profits and valuation are privatized. And when private greed that is so unaccountable goes too far, all the costs come back up on us. And this is an astonishing thing to think about as we look at what the internet is today. The largest companies for accommodation, for taxis, for media are internet companies. They call themselves technology companies, but in many ways they've taken over every vertical, every industry imaginable, from Uber to Facebook and so on. And their model, and Amazon is really a central figure in all of this, their model increasingly is one of charging rents, extracting value and extracting data out of all of our experiences. So we might talk to one another on these platforms or exchange on these platforms, goods and services, but the pipe is being dominated by very few. And as a result, they are wealthier than any companies in the history of the world, more or less. And their model is to employ almost nobody and own almost nothing. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm starting with the sadder part of this story, and I'm going to talk about what we can do about this. We all know this, from Jeff Bezos to Mark Zuckerberg to Bill Gates, who's kind of a revered figure in certain communities, especially during this pandemic. It's not only billionaires who are getting richer than ever during this pandemic, but it's tech billionaires in particular. And we're seeing blank checks being handed out to big tech companies. And that is something that is a common issue, regardless of which party or administration we speak about. So we can go to the next slide, please. And increasingly, tech companies describe themselves as AI companies. And we are also realizing more and more that many of these technologies, because of the insular world of those who are building and designing these technologies, meaning often white and Asian males, have turned out to reflect, normalize, and perpetuate implicit biases at the minimum. We also know there are many explicit biases like outward, brutal racism, misogyny, and so on. But more and more, we are realizing that AI systems are normalizing and reinforcing those biases. So you can see this as an example, just with President Obama's face. This is a technology that some of you might have on your phones called FaceApp, which is supposed to make you look more beautiful. And look what it did to President Obama's face. Turned him more light skins, right? So that's very, very telling. Continue to the next slide. I'm going to do this quite quickly so we can talk about this later. But what's particularly pernicious about this is not sort of silly apps like FaceApp, but the fact that more and more every aspect of our lives is being technologized. From our justice system or lack thereof, in my opinion, from our policing systems or lack thereof of kind of justice-based policing systems, to insurance, to healthcare, to pretty much everything. Everything is running through pipes of proprietary, private, corporate, digital technology. And this is a screenshot from an incredible article, I think a great piece of investigative journalism that was put out by my friends at ProPublica that showed how the gentleman on the left, who had no prior felony conviction whatsoever, and the gentleman on the right, who had multiple prior felony convictions, it turns out that a courtroom algorithmic AI system, which predicted, like Minority Report style, the possibility of committing a future crime, judged the gentleman on the left, the African-American male, as far more at risk than the white male, the Caucasian male on the right. So our AI systems, our technologies are learning from our own discrimination. And that's why we need to get this right. And I'm highly hopeful we can do so. Next slide. And this is extremely important. So don't pay attention to the soap operas of Google having spats with President Trump, Amazon having Jeff Bezos and Trump having spats. Amazon is in business with President Trump. They are selling facial recognition technology, which we've learned has turned out to be highly racist, to ICE and the Department of Homeland Security. And it turns out, even if you support Trump's actions with ICE, it turns out that this technology is misidentifying our Latinx brothers and sisters and other immigrants who are documented as undocumented, because the entire databases of so-called criminals are Black and brown people dominantly. Next slide, please. And we actually saw this just recently with Google signing a major contract with the Trump administration to do a virtual wall, virtual surveillance of the wall. This just happened last week. Moreover, we are delegating these sorts of AI big data technologies, not just in the kind of policing and courtroom type sector, the political sector, but also to potentially replace many jobs, including human resources jobs. So there's great research out there that is showing how many AI systems that are being applied, for example, for human resources jobs are selecting again and again and again men over women, even if those women have equivalent, if not more qualifications, because they are learning from the biases of our world that women are somehow not seen as being as good at science and technology, which is a bias that was repeated by the president of the University Harvard, where I did my PhD, Lawrence Summers, when I was a PhD student there. Next slide, please. And we also know about these spectacular failures of signing on to black boxes and not really knowing what is happening, right? The Cambridge Analytica story was a great example of that. I had off the record contact with multiple figures in Cambridge Analytica for about 2-3 years before all of this went down, before it became a public kind kind of spectacle. And I can honestly tell you that many big tech folks saw this Cambridge Analytica example as, you know, a feature of their systems, not a bug, and certainly not something that's calamitous for democracy. Next slide. And a big part of that, I want to just say, is because all of our data is open for sale in this country. We are not doing enough in the areas of data and justice. I can buy all of your credit card records. I can get a lot of intimate data from you, and I can aggregate that with data that I harvest, for example, on Facebook. And I can build psychometric profiles of you that could behaviorally modify you. And increasingly, we're finding out that our technologies are built to optimize for attention, addiction, and behavioral modification. Obviously, that movie, The Social Dilemma, touched on these issues. I try to look at a much deeper level at what is occurring with the privatization of public life. Now let's talk about some incredible, inspiring examples, and I'll do this very quickly. First, I want to tell you about work I did living and working and being on the ground in Tahrir Square in Egypt. You all remember that? The Arab Spring between 2011 and 2013. Some of you might remember that that was described as a Facebook revolution or a social media revolution. I was a little skeptical about that. I was like, is this a way of saying our tools will liberate those people? So I went there and I spent a long time there hanging out, talking to people all across the country, with people of all walks of life, Islamists, etc., right? All walks of life. And what we found out was almost nobody had internet access at that time, but the people who did, it wasn't about Facebook or Twitter, it was about how they used it. It was about their tactics, what we call their practices. And particularly, look at this image. You see satellite dishes shot everywhere, satellite dishes everywhere in this picture that I took. And what people were doing was they were using Twitter in particular, but other platforms, to hijack and interrupt the television media cycle so they could influence people in indirect ways, which is super interesting. So it's all about people knowing what the limitations are, the affordances are, and the possibilities are about technology and acting in that way. Next slide, please. So you could see that, for example, a bunch of activists coming together, talking with people all over the world on Twitter, as you can see in the screen in the back, but also bringing together the voices of people on the street, workers, people who are in neighborhoods, and so on. And this was an incredible story that I was telling over 3 years, and I did some writing for Al Jazeera at that time, also on that topic. Next slide, please. You could even see examples of how people were taking things that they saw online and projecting it into public spaces. So that gentleman there behind the projector is a man named, who's really inspiring to me, is a man named Khalid Abdallah. It turns out he's the actor in The Kite Runner, and he turned out to be a great informant, colleague, friend, and very inspiring activist. Now we can go to the next slide. So let's pivot off of Egypt and talk about all of these experiments all over the world where people are taking power over technology, workers, communities, and so on. This is right here in Detroit. I highly recommend you look up this story or watch the video. Motherboard covered it. This is the Detroit Community Technology Project. Communities, dominantly Black and brown, but almost completely Black, were building their own internet and intranet. And why did they do that? Because of the education, the skills, the jobs, and they were able to monetize the network accordingly by building local networks. And this is an argument. We think of technology as something that's handed to us by the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world. We can do it ourselves. We can DIY this stuff. And I really want to impress upon all of you that this is not just happening in Detroit, but it's happening all over the world. Next slide, please. So we can even look at this idea of equity in businesses, right? We're seeing so much money being made out of technology monetized labor and gig economy kinds of platforms. And that is fine and fair, but we're also realizing almost all of that money is going to investors and a little bit going to execs. Almost nothing is going to drivers or workers. And that is why it's so extremely important to look at models of equity sharing. For example, imagine an Uber where the employees owned Uber or had greater equity in the business. We can think about ways with this astonishing economic injustice and inequality we see in this country to use technology to bring people, to lift all boats, right? To restore greater equality in our society so our society can heal and we can all move forward together. That's what a progressive vision of technology for me looks like. Next slide, please. And I want to give you two really quick examples from Mexico, from southern Mexico. First, in the Oaxaca region, where I've been doing my fieldwork for several years. I've been working with Zapotec, Mixtec, and Mixe communities that are living in cloud forests. They were not provided with cell phone service, but they wanted the connectivity. So what did they do? They built their own collectively owned internet, intranet, and mobile phone networks. And this project is called Teléfono Indígena Comunitaria, Community Indigenous Telephony. And you won't believe this, but these folks are calling their relatives and friends who are in Oxnard and in the Central Valley. So it's been amazing for me to be on both sides of the phone call and realizing that these networks can create great amounts of value and resources for all people in a community, that they are the owners. Next slide, please. An example of this also we can see in Chiapas, which is a little bit south of Oaxaca, bordering state to Oaxaca. This is the Ictacop Collective. It's a Mayan term, which means words in the wind in Celtal. And this is a bunch of kids, 20-something-year-olds, not trained in engineering. What are they doing? They're hacking various technologies and building their own community radio stations. Community radio is such a powerful technology that almost none of us think about. So they basically built their own local networks because they weren't provided internet access. They wanted it. And how did they do it? They bought one landline connection 30 miles away from their community, and they literally MacGyvered it. They rigged it. They rigged that network to other towers, connecting network to network to network by putting little towers on tops of different, what they call cerros, small hills. And this is incredible. This is something we see happening all over the world. My PhD work was collaborations I did with Native American communities in California looking at this very issue. People and communities can take power, and in so doing, in taking power over technology, their cultural, their social, their political values can be they can be inscribed into the technology. Next slide. And I'm almost wrapped here. So I want to end with just two examples from Kenya, and then with some of the proposals and legislation that I'm trying to work on. This is Maria, a friend of mine who lives in Kibera, who is based in Kibera is like some considered a slum, but I don't really like that term, of Nairobi. It's a working class, very densely populated community. And you see what she's doing there. She's taking these things that we have that are designed to die, like a Monsanto seed. Our Apple phones and all our phones are designed to die. It's called planned obsolescence, and she's repairing and recycling it. And why is she doing that? Because of economic constraints. And this is an incredible model. Our constraints economically can actually be great motivators for thinking about design, thinking about what real innovation actually is. Next slide. And you won't believe this, but I tell this story in Beyond the Valley in my book. They are building 3D printers almost completely out of electronic waste. And the 3D printers are outperforming American and Chinese 3D printers, and they're a fraction of the cost. And this is a whole model that in Kenya they call jua kali in Swahili, which means hot sun, because they all started with like tables and soldering guns and just like mixing, remixing, repairing, hustling. This model that we can do it ourselves. We find a way we learn by doing, we learn by trying, we learn by playing. It's a whole other model of technology that puts people in charge of its design and its use. Okay, final slide. So bringing a lot of this back home, all these experiments around the world in our country that we talk about, I really think it's high time we really push forward what I call a digital Bill of Rights. That's something I've been pushing forward with my interviews, with my writing, and so on. And I'm working with a couple members of the House and the House Progressive Caucus, but also trying to insert some of these ideas into the Biden-Harris world as well, which is really based upon thinking about technology in an intersectional way. It's not just our privacy, but it's our economic lives, it's our political lives, it's our cultural lives. So thinking about all of these layers of humanizing technology, a digital future that lifts all of us up. And that is what I'm deeply hopeful about. And finally, you can keep up with me these ways, and I thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for having me.
Oh, Ramesh, thank you so much. I see in the chat There's so much enthusiasm for the ideas that you're sharing, and it just makes it so clear to me that big tech relies on our ignorance, and that it is in the people, in our claiming our ability to hold our futures in our hands, and particularly in relationship to technology, that the justice lies. So I look forward to speaking more about this with you and with everyone. Thank you so much. Yes. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Tananarive Due. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author, screenwriter, and producer who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism in the UCLA Department of African American Studies. She has been a leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award. She has written many books, and with her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stevens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. Welcome, Tananarive.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. I am so excited to be here, and thank you to UCLA Arts. Ramesh, that was such an inspirational talk. And of course, the intersection of technology and sociology and politics is all a part of Afrofuturism. So I'd like to talk a little bit today about Afrofuturism and hope. So if you could go to the next slide, thank you. Obviously, the fact that we're all sitting here right now is a testament to hope, because while community is one of the antidotes to anxiety, there's no question about it. I think if we didn't have a certain amount of hope right now, we might all be curled up under our blankets and wouldn't even be able to attend an amazing event like this, to find community with other people who are trying to find ways to feel hope, to create hope, to unpack hope. And one of the things that started for me this spring was the Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, a theologian, and I started a webinar series called Octavia Tried to Tell Us, Parable for Today's Pandemic. And it's really all about, broadly speaking, Afrofuturism and how it can be applied to dystopia like the one we're living in now, but also specifically the works of Octavia E. Butler. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Afrofuturism and Octavia Butler, and hopefully spread some of that hope from Afrofuturism to this crowd here tonight. So next slide, please. Basically, the way I teach Afrofuturism at UCLA is rather broad. It's the Black speculative arts. So it's science fiction, fantasy, horror, but not just in literature or film, but also music, comics. I teach it in a very broad way, and it has really emerged as an exciting model of how to process the traumas of the past and the present while working toward a better future. And often that work is engaging with technology, but I think the word futurism is a little bit misleading, because it can also be magical realism. It can also be horror. It doesn't always have to do with futurism and technology, but often it does. And its philosophy, I find, is very refreshing and inherently hopeful. And for those of you who have been sort of immersing yourself in the arts during this pandemic, whether for escape or just to see something beautiful, I think you can understand also how powerful it is for us as Black people to embrace the arts as a way to maintain hope. Next slide, please. So back in about 2017, I was at a conference called Black Women Rise, and Angela Davis was there, the activist. Angela Davis was there, and I was speaking on the topic of Afrofuturism, so it was in the air. But really, I was trying to ask her, how do you hold on to that light? Anyone who has met her in person knows that she's a very sunny person. She's not what you think she'll be. And her answer has always stayed with me. She said, it's not that I'm optimistic because I see the world through rose-colored glasses. is that if the work that you've done for so many decades and years would make a difference in the future, we have to be able to imagine a different future, even though there are no guarantees. But in order to do the work we do, however we do it, whether as artists or as activists, we have to believe a different kind of world is possible. And I want to bring that up in particular because we are at a point in American history and in our personal histories when it is hard to hang on to hope. What is all this fighting for? My mother passed away in 2012, and she always warned about the clock turning back. She would not have been the least bit surprised by our current so-called president in the White House. And I felt like I was kind of taken by surprise. So the fact that my father, who's now 84, and people like Angela Davis can still maintain their hope after all they've seen and as hard as they've been working, and not get discouraged and not get bitter, which I think is the hard part, not to be bitter, is very, very important when you look at Afrofuturism. Okay, next slide, please. So this wonderful woman here, who actually attended UCLA for a time, is Octavia E. Butler, the late, great Octavia E. Butler. I knew Octavia during her lifetime, not as a very close friend, but she was very close to my husband, Stephen Barnes. So after I married Steve, I was often a +1 and got to hear many, many great conversations between them. I was so tongue-tied and nervous every time I spoke to her that it held me back from deeper friendship, which is a lesson I've tried to learn for the future going forward. Don't be so shy, don't be so shy. But in any case, the impact of her work is taking off in new and greater directions. Oh, next slide, please. This is actually a picture of me with Octavia, and next to Octavia, right to left, it would be me, Octavia Butler, Nalo Hopkinson, who is a wonderful writer and fantasist, and my husband, Stephen Barnes. And this was taken at Howard University by David Finley, the photographer, I believe back in about 2003, not long before Octavia died. Next slide, please. So she wrote a book published back in 1993 called Parable of the Sower. I saw some talk in the chat. Some of you have read it. Parable of the Talents is even more frightening to read in this current political environment because, I mean, it even foresees the slogan, Make America Great Again. Maggots is what those supporters are called, as opposed to MAGA. And I just read a chapter on virtual reality after I just got an Oculus. So I was like, wow, Octavia really, really did know. But it's the basic premise of Parable of the Sower, it's near future in the late 20s, as a matter of fact, we're getting closer to it, where basically society has fallen apart. Just use your imagination and imagine we're a little bit worse off than we actually are in real life. And that's where Parable of the Sower begins. Walled off communities, very, very violent. You have to pay for police protection, addiction, violence running rampant. And for the first time in 2020, ostensibly fueled by what's going on now, the book reached the New York Times bestseller list for the very first time. This never happened in Butler's lifetime. But just as I started that webinar series, Octavia tried to tell us, I think a lot of people sort of figured out, wow, let's look to this art, let's look to this literature to see if there are any answers for us as we are facing such terrible times. Next slide, please. So as grim as this book is, Octavia embeds within it a little grain of what I will call utopianism, which is that her teenage protagonist, Lauren Olamina, again, led by children, led by youth, as change often is, has created a philosophy, you might call it a religion, called Earthseed. And one of the parables, and this got me through election night in 2016, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. That's the line that kept going through my mind 4 years ago. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. So even though Octavia, she might have been called pessimistic, she had a very grim view of humanity and our habits, how hierarchical we are, how we don't learn from history, how we don't learn from mistakes, how denial, she would not have been surprised by mask deniers, for example, because denial is so strong. But inside this very, very grim and difficult to read series, she has embedded these seeds of hope with the parable of the sower, quite literally, where you can sprout from just, maybe 100 seeds don't grow, but the one does grow. Next slide, please. And Parable of the Sower has had somewhat of a renaissance. There's a graphic novel that came out not too long ago that John Jennings and Damian Duffy created. And on the right, you see wonderful singer Toshi Regan, who with her mother, Bernice Johnson Regan, created this Parable of the Sower opera, which was the very last public event I attended at UCLA before the shutdown. So I got this huge infusion of this beautiful music and this hope right before we entered this chaos, and who knew what was going to happen next. Next slide, please. So really, creativity is the underpinning of Afrofuturism in all of its forms, not just the artist's chosen genre, but creativity within their artistic forms. And it really does help provide a vibrant, living hope that the future can be molded and shaped. So films like, next slide, Daughters of the Dust by Julie Dash in 1991 is about a family at a crossroads, but also filled with hope. Or like, next slide, 2018's Black Panther, directed by Ryan Coogler, which stunned the world and inspired so many people with its images of futurism mixed with honoring tradition and honoring history, which is how Afrofuturists see the path forward. Next slide, please. So we have not just Octavia, obviously, in literature, so many artists and comic artists. Colson Whitehead is using magical realism, Nnedi Okorafor, Nigerian American African futurist. So many artists who've been shut out of these conversations are starting to have their voices heard. Next slide. And I cannot let it go without shouting out Herbie Hancock, because I also teach Herbie Hancock in my Afrofuturism class. This photo is from circa 1983, I believe it is. He is such an innovator in taking technology and fusing it with his art. And that is also Afrofuturism. And as artists, all of us are trying to light a way forward through these times, no matter where we come from or what we look like. Afrofuturism is one of those beacons that helps to provide innovation, creativity, and hope.
Thank you, Tananarive.
I thought I would segue into the next talk.
Yeah, you're doing
right?
my work for me. It's such a pleasure. Let's see now. This is, oh, I lost my bio here. 1 second. Small technical difficulty.
Take your time, as they say in church.
It's one of the things we're learning about Zoom, isn't it? Oh. Well, I want to introduce Herbie, although you have led me straight in, but my I'm going to just go from my cheat sheet over here. It's now my pleasure to introduce our third and final panelist, Herbie Hancock, active across 6 decades. 6 decades. Herbie remains where he has always been, right here in front of you, and at the forefront of world culture, technology, business, and music. Herbie has been an integral part of every popular music movement since the 1960s. He received an Academy Award for his Round Midnight film score and 14 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016. He is an adjunct professor in the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. We are so fortunate. And he is there, he's a creative chair for jazz, and he's a creative chair for jazz for the Los Angeles Philharmonic Association and chairman of the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz. In 2011, Herbie was named a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador in recognition of his dedication to the promotion of peace through dialogue, culture, and the arts. Welcome, Herbie. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you very much. Let me see. Let me bring this out. By the way, it's a pleasure to be here. I loved everything that you said, Tananarive and Ramesh. I mean, you guys have me thinking now, what else can I find out about? Because it was exciting and informative. And we all need that. And it gave me a lot of hope, I'll tell you that. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen and get this to do. Yeah, can you see it now? Great, okay. So most of what you're going to see in the following pages actually comes from a book written by Daisaku Ikeda, who was my life mentor. I'm a Nichiren Buddhist, a member of SGI, which is Soka Gakkai International. And this book is called Hope is a Decision. And there are just some amazing passages in it. So we're going to start with this. Now I have to move my screen over so that I can read it. Everything begins with us. I do not believe that people are powerless. The philosophical tradition that I embrace, and this is from Daisaku Ikeda's book, but it's also the philosophical tradition that I embrace, teaches on the most fundamental dimension, that of life itself, and that each human life partakes of the limitless life force of the cosmos. And that same power that moves the universe, it's in here, it's inside of us. Each individual has immense potential, and a great change in the inner dimension of one individual's life has the power to touch others' lives and transform society. Everything begins with us. So, as it says here, if we look at the world today, we got a lot of problems. And it's easy to feel despair. So first, I'm gonna tell you about my evil twin. My evil twin is that other side of myself who loves to mess things up, who is full of fear and loves it, who is full of despair and loves it, who doesn't like to get things right, who likes to get things wrong, who likes to foul me up in some way, who tries to stop me. Everybody has that evil twin. So that evil twin looking at this sign that says hope, well, it's a good thing it's got a question mark. I should scratch that one out and put despair up. Now we're hearing the voice of the evil twin. So where are we now? We got problems. We got fears. Look, climate change. This tells it all. In December of 2014, that coral reef looks healthy. Next year, February, it was dying. In August of the same year, it was dead. There are so many things that we need to look at. We need to look at immigration reform, DACA. We have to actually do something that's humanitarian about that. These are people who were maybe born in another country, but they know America. They were raised here. We have to take care of that. Human rights have to be dealt with. The criminal justice system has to be dealt with. And we have the pandemic, right? What about NATO? And what about the countries that are our allies? What about the countries that aren't our allies? We have moved far away from them. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. See that dollar sign on the bottom? It's very expensive to go to college these days, right? What about student debt? That still has not been solved. There's more. Every time I turn on the TV and watch the news, I begin to realize that we need to re-examine our laws, because some of them are not working the way we would like for them to work. Some of them were made for a different time and need to be adjusted for the times that we're actually living in today. And we have demonized the word socialism. Many of us have. And many of us have raised the term capitalism to make it seem like capitalism is America. That may apply to the people who are very wealthy on the top. What about the people that are on the bottom of the totem pole? Anyway, we need to re-examine those different viewpoints. We actually need to even enjoy talking to and hearing the opinions of people who we don't agree with. Fear is another thing. There's a question about religion and governance. We don't have that here, but they do in countries like Iran, for example, and others. People are afraid of that. Coal miners. Coal is what is interfering with our climate, right? That's going to go away at some point. What are we going to do about the people who work in coal mines? Divisions between people. I mean, it's tearing us apart. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Big question is, what is truth? Conspiracy theories are like all over the place. Trolls are coming in from various areas of the world, telling us things that in the attempt to try to confuse us. And they're working. Now, I have this slide up here because Mahatma Gandhi, he led a famous nonviolent struggle in India. And it was based on his unshakable faith in humanity, in the capacity of people for good. And I saw a movie. I wish I could remember the name of that movie, but it was about colonialism, and a great portion of it was devoted to the British, who had colonized and owned really India. And as we all know, Gandhi was trying to bring freedom for India and get the colonizers out of there, right? So they could have their country. Now that picture on the bottom is a picture of women. It says Gandhi led thousands of Indian women to block the train tracks by laying down on the tracks. I remember in this film, they actually didn't have women on the train tracks. They had men on the train tracks. Maybe because the director thought that would be for that time too difficult for people to be able to even see. But I learned just yesterday that there were women that were on that train track. And in the film, you see a train that's full of British soldiers on the track, and they get to this line of women, thousands, right? And the engineer stops, and he gets the command to go forward and just cut their heads off if that's what it takes. He tried to scare those women, and it didn't work. They stayed right there. The engineer didn't budge. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill those people. I mean, that's the faith that Gandhi had in the humanity of the British. See, when I first read that, I was thinking it was about the humanity of Indians, but I see it now. He was trusting that the British would not go over the heads of these women. It's incredible. So right now, I mean, there's so many fears, so many problems that we're facing, especially here in America, that sometimes we cannot feel hope. If you can't feel hope, you have to create it. So this is the time to create some hope. But we can do this by digging deeper within ourselves. And our capacity of hope can actually be expanded and can be strengthened by difficult circumstances. How many of us who are older, I mean, they don't have to be as old as I am, 80 years old, but many people can look back at their lives and see that if a certain issue that caused them suffering in the beginning created an environment where they had to come up with some solutions that actually moved them forward. So if it hadn't been for whatever that tragedy was, they wouldn't be where they are today in a more secure place. I know a lot of people that have stories like that. I believe that the ultimate tragedy in life is not physical death. Now, this is a quote from Daisaku Ikeda, who wrote that book. Rather, it is the spiritual death of losing hope, giving up on our own possibilities for growth. The decision. Okay. Hope in this sense is a decision. It is the most important decision we can make. And hope changes everything, starting with our lives. But in that second thing, see the guy running? It says, but we must take action. I mean, hope can be hoping somebody else can do this or something else can do this. Hope for just the change. Like, we had to vote. And if we haven't voted, we got one more chance. Actually, maybe, yeah, that's it, right? And that the third part, which says winter never fails to turn to spring. We see that in the environment. But I have a story to tell you later on about what that means to me. And as long as we have hope, there's nothing we cannot achieve. When we possess the treasure of hope, we can draw forth our inner potential and strength. A person of hope can always advance, and I truly believe that. An interchange for the better in a single person, one person can become wiser, stronger, more compassionate. And that is the essential for first turn of the wheel toward realizing peaceful coexistence and fulfillment for the whole human race. And I firmly believe that a great human revolution in just one person can be the start of a transformation in the destiny of whole societies and all humankind. And for the individual, everything starts in the inner reaches of life itself. It's reaching inside. Now, you have to realize hope is a flame and it can easily go out. So you have to keep fanning it and keep it burning. And you do that with your own determination. It's most crucial that our determination to continue to believe in the limitless dignity and possibilities of both ourselves and others. We can't not let despair paralyze us. We can't let it just stop us. Rather than passively accepting things as they are, we must embark on the challenge of creating a new reality. And it is in this effort that true undying hope is found. I was reading a book that says everything is, and has a F with a star, CKED. So it's an expletive. Everything is okay. And the writer talks about Nietzsche. It says Nietzsche instead believed we must look beyond hope. We must look beyond values. We must evolve into something beyond good and evil. For him, this morality of the future had to begin with something that he called amor fati, or love of one's fate. But I want to go to, if I can find it, the last part of this, which says, because we must break out of our cycle of religious conflict, we must emerge from the ideological cocoons. We must feel the feeling brain feel, but deny it the stories of meaning and value that it so desperately craves. We must stretch beyond our conception of good and evil. We must learn to love what is. I ain't buying that. I'm not buying that at all. I can understand the idea of loving what is, but we have the capacity and the ability to be able to change what is, to shape it the way we would like it to be, to not just go along for the ride, but be in the driver's seat. Winter never fails to turn to spring. I have my own several experiences about that. And this particular one is about when I did actually my last record, which was called the Imagine Project. And I made this record in order to show what could be created by people from different cultures, different backgrounds, speaking a different language, and bringing them together in a project that combines all those forces to create something that no one could do from one culture. And so I had the very first piece that we recorded actually was in India. And Anushka Shankar, Ravi Shankar's daughter, was on it with Wayne Shorter and Chaka Khan. And then we had a singer from India. The strange thing was that she was from South India. We had a translation of a writer, Rilke, had a translation of one of his poems, and we had it translated into Hindi, but she didn't speak Hindi, she spoke Tamil. And so I went in the back room and I chanted, Nam Yo Renge Kyo, Nam Yo Renge Kyo, Nam Yo Renge Kyo. I chanted for a while, and it dawned on me, I said, wait a minute, she speaks English, people in India speak English. What if we do a phonetic translation of the Hindi? Well, actually, we had English already, right? Why don't we do a phonetic translation of the English from Rilke and give that translation to the singer who sang in Tamil? And anyway, it worked. And I mean, it sounded like she spoke Hindi to me. We had people from bass player that was Tal Wilkenfeld, she's from Australia. We had people from Mali, from the Sudan. From Ireland. We had Juanes from Colombia. Los Lobos, who are from California here. And they did something that was both in English and in Spanish. But anyway, at the end of recording all of those different sessions, all of a sudden 5 things happened that slowed down, that stopped the whole process. One of the singers, it was Seal. He didn't like what he had done on that first recording, and he wouldn't approve it. And also, Elton John was supposed to sing one of the songs with India Arie, who was American, right? Dave Matthews was on it, and for some reason he didn't like this piece that we had recorded, and I had to actually bring actually they were hard drives. I had to bring them to the mastering engineer in like within the next 4 days, and then we were going towards the weekend. Everybody in my staff started crying, you know, because they thought this is the worst thing that could happen, you know, and I had a deadline. But the Buddhism that I practice tells me that when you're actually doing something that moves things forward, that are positive and can have a dynamic impact, the negative forces that you have in your life will present themselves in many different ways, trying to stop you from moving forward. So I finally said, I know what this is. This is a sign that what I'm doing is exactly the right thing. So I went and started chanting. And guess what? Everything changed around. That the deadline that I thought was on Monday, it turned out the mastering engineer had the leeway for me for about 4 days. We were able to call John Legend, who was in New York. The executive producer happened to be in New York at that particular weekend. We called John Legend, who actually said, I'm actually in the recording studio now making some tracks. And he agreed to do the part that Seal had canceled. And he said, I can do it tomorrow. You know, so I spoke to him on a Saturday. He did it on Sunday. And everything completely turned around. The Dave Matthews piece, he found something else by the Beatles to do. We were able to do that in one day. It's just everything converged and moved. We moved the external reality. And I was able to get the record out on time. But that is turning the winter into spring. So this is about delusion. The deluded mind is trapped in a descending cycle of negativity and misery. In contrast, an enlightened mind, one that shines as an entity of the mystic law, which is the law of cause and effect. And if anybody wanted to ask me about that afterwards, they can, of course. And it carves out a solid ascending path of optimism and hope, having the power to transform that which is negative into something positive. Like the pandemic, you know what's positive about it? It's showing us that human beings are a family. We are a family. It's pointing us toward that. It wants to kill all of us. It doesn't care who we love, what gender we are, what the color of our skin, what religion we practice. It doesn't care about any of those things. So if we, of course, our first reaction is going to be a negative one because it's reactive. But if you have more of a causative outlook and look for another prism to view this situation, then you can see there's something to learn from this pandemic that can help us. It's showing us what we need to do in order to be able to begin creating the future that Ramesh was talking about. Okay, I'm gonna go on and move through this. This is a beautiful thing that I was gonna read. I'll just read a part of it. Each human life is a precious microcosm of the great universe. And within us is the Buddha nature, which when activated, functions as the courage, wisdom, and compassion needed to create a humanistic society that at its core respects the dignity of life. Unless someone awakens to this truth themselves and strives to awaken others, peace remains an empty theory. It is by striving to awaken others to the greatness of their lives that one awakens to their own inherent power. We're not just supposed to look out for ourselves. We're supposed to help others. That's the only thing that's going to make us happy. In the face of overwhelming reality of our world today, we may wonder, can I make a difference? And Buddhism empowers the individual, illuminating the dynamic potential that surges forth when we decide to stand up as a catalyst for change, regardless of whether the path forward is clear. Daisaku Ikeda says, quote, "We must call forth the power of hope from within the depths of each individual's life. This is the power that can transform even the most intractable reality." And at the very end, it says, everything begins with one step. In conclusion, I just love the sound of this. For millennia, humanity has pursued the goal of materialistic necessities of our material necessities of our survival. Yet, as Gandhi stated, Earth can produce enough to satisfy everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. If our materialistic culture continues to be driven by the unrestrained impulses of desire, it will completely escape our control. Even now, it threatens to consume and exhaust Earth itself, undermining the life systems that support our existence. Ultimately, all human activities have as their goal the realization of happiness. Why then have we ended up producing the opposite result? Could the underlying cause be our failure to correctly understand the true nature of happiness? The gratification of desire is not happiness. And it says, Socrates said, a person who spends his life scratching an itch would have to be considered happy. Genuine happiness can be achieved only when we transform our way of life from the unthinking pursuit of pleasure to one committed to enriching our inner lives, to a focus of being more rather than simply having more. Our lives are most effectively enhanced and fulfilled when we seek the kind of happiness that is not limited to ourselves, but includes others' welfare. And I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Herbie Hancock, and so much there to contemplate, a lifetime's worth, right? I feel as though all three of our guests have really reminded us about the importance of taking responsibility for our future, individually and collectively, and indeed what an honor this is to consider these things together. Now, in terms of taking responsibility for our future, the future as it is in the next, 40 minutes or so, I want to suggest that we go with a slightly different game plan. We're going to move into a discussion with Ramesh and Tananarive and Herbie, but we're not going to break out into students. I want you to stay right here with us. We're not going to go to breakout rooms tonight. We're going to have an opportunity to share in what our middle school students have done in response to this question of hope. And then we'll have a little time for some questions and answers. But right now, let's seize this moment and go into a discussion without cutting it short with all of our guests. I think there's so much to talk about here. This is so very brilliant. I'll leave it to you to jump in.
Okay, I know. I was advised to kind of bring up one common theme, and we can start our discussion accordingly. Completely blown away by both of you and both of your presentations. When we all met, just telling everybody just a few days ago on Zoom, on Zoom, I felt it as an energetic exchange more than certainly not an academic exchange, and I mean that with the best of intentions, or even a political. It was an energetic exchange, and I immediately felt like a friendship and a kinship with a man whose music I've listened to since I was a teenager, and an incredible colleague who's writing about and exploring themes that are really, really powerful. I read Octavia Butler, and I was looking at Sun Ra's syllabus on Afrofuturism, like we were talking about. So let me just ask one question, and then we take it from there. It felt like something that really tied all of us together. Was the feeling that through that our imagination and our hope can be channeled in a way that relates to this feeling and energy of what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, which is this idea, Buddhist teacher, the idea that we are actually not really separate. We are sharing energy, and this is what you were just saying at the end, Herbie, that by giving and being there for others, there's something very generative that heals and empowers all of us. So my question is, as we face crises, we've had a lot of them this year, as we face some potential new crises, we'll see. How do we foreground that energy of hope and determination and the desire to act collectively? How do we get there you know, because obviously an immediate response to things that are crisis-based is fear and anxiety, which can disable energy. That's my question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the fear is, yes, there's a collective fear, but the individual feels a singular fear. I mean, that, I believe, is the stronger sense of fear. It's something that one feels inside. I love the idea of community getting together, a whole idea of responding in groups that are also connected to other groups, that are also interconnected with other groups, so that there's a chain of like-minded, just chain of feelings, really, because everybody's not going to agree on everything. But it's important to be able to take the ideas, or take the understanding, and have the compassion to attempt to feel what a person who has an opposing view feel, what they feel, and in an attempt to try to find out what it is that can bring about a positive conclusion that can, again, as your question poses, to move everything forward.
You know, what's really interesting about these times is that at a time when community feels more important than ever, I can say I personally feel less and less like my neighborhood is my community. I
Mm,
think in a lot of ways, you know, I take a lot of walks, and I feel nervous about passing cars, especially throughout the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer. You know, you don't know where people's hearts are. Even
mm,
making small talk at the gas station feels fraught with conflict. And there are no campaign signs in my neighborhood. Everyone is sort of keeping themselves to themselves. So one of the most interesting things about this pandemic is the way we've had to sort of redefine what community means and how
mm,
community looks using technology, actually, to speak to your presentation, Ramesh, because this beautiful and damnable technology that is Zoom has brought me to a webinar where I get to hang out with you all and meet one of my idols, Herbie Hancock, and have this conversation. And I think I have to go back to the arts. One thing I am noticing is that within the arts, community does have a way of finding itself. People who love the same music, people who love Afrofuturism, people who love horror. We just saw that with Halloween, find each other. And there's the basic level, which is just human interaction and sharing thoughts with people, when some people have literally been isolated in their homes for months. They're immunocompromised. They just don't go anywhere if they can help it. And sometimes it jumps off into activism. One thing I noticed when I first started teaching Afrofuturism was that it attracted activists. One of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter was in one of my first classes. I cannot remember who she was and what her name was. I apologize for that. But I noticed that bent, that people who are inspired by art and imagination, especially innovation within art and imagination, also tend to have an activist bent.
mm,
Yeah, for me, the hope can translate into action on multiple levels. I think we can create community even with people who transiently we interact with, if we're able to be present and non-reactive by checking ourselves and observing our own energy and doing those little things like a smile, or like tipping people more, or just showing some compassion, karuna, you know, and like that can generate a lot. And I'm pretty hyperactive and super passionate about what I work on, because it's not my work. It's like I'm trying to tell stories of people's power, transforming technology in the best of our humanity, our collectivity, you know? And so having seen the heroism, the creativity, the bravery of people standing up, not out of an energy of anger, but out of an energy of collectivity and love and defiance, righteous indignation, right? Like, and participating in the protests this past summer, participating in Occupy back in the day. I think, like, as a scholar and a writer, my energy comes from that energy that all of us humans are capable of and we exhibit all the time. And I just think I want to also make the point, and I said this sort of earlier, and Herbie alluded to this with conspiracy theories and so on. A lot of this world that is being fed to us through our technologies is a dystopic framing of reality. And that's not because the tech companies want the world to be dystopic per se, but because it works to keep our eyeballs on their platform. It's a business, it's a toxic, parasitic business model. Yeah. And we're going to change it.
I was just remembering when I first saw on television people from New York at 8 o'clock in the evening opening their windows or coming out on their porches if it was warm weather, applauding the first responders, applauding mail carriers. Applauding people, anybody delivering packages, applauding like people delivering food, people working in grocery stores, you know, the cashiers. I mean, I have never seen that in my whole life in America. And that only happened because of the pandemic. Not only the pandemic, it's what's deep in people's hearts. You know, I feel kind of sad that it didn't keep on going. Now I think it's kind of faded out a little bit. But if it wasn't for the pandemic, we wouldn't have been able to experience that and join as a family to appreciate those who have gone unappreciated all our lives. That's historic. And it's something I will carry. This is something that we can carry forward in order to lay the foundation for the kind of future that we want to have. We have to keep that because nobody passed a law for that to happen. People cared. We have that inside of us. So that kind of inspiration, yeah.
We've seen lots of examples of food banks, of mutual aid networks. There's a bunch of bills out there around things like public banking. I mean, a lot of this is happening. Again, I just think if we actually look at what people, you know, American citizens quantitatively across the board, what they support, it's, you know, it's Medicare for all, it's universal education. We are actually a country where citizens en masse support policies that are good for all people. We are a very generous and good people. And I think that there's been a little bit of a game played on all of us where we think of ourselves in a worse way than who we actually are, partly because of, you know, 45 and so on, right? But there's a lot of manipulation that is occurring in the mediation of that image and his supporters, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a manifestation of that dark energy and that fear-based energy and the trauma. But I don't really think that's us. I really don't.
Well, that's us too.
Yeah, you said that. That's right. Your twin.
Yeah, that's what we have to deal with, is that we have to realize we are both those things. We are the worst, and we have amazing, unlimited goodness in us. Just because we're human beings. And incidentally, America actually is known for being the country that is the most generous about giving financial support to other organizations. And that doesn't happen so easily in Europe, for example. You know, you have to give them something. But in America, people will give support for something that they think is good. And so that's, well, one of the things that we need to deal with in a more serious way, and that is Americans are kind of arrogant. We know so little about the rest of the world, generally speaking, and we don't seem to care that much about the rest of the world, and we're not encouraged enough to care about those who are not living on these shores. And it actually is to our own loss, because we don't have the advantage of knowing, for example, in criminal justice, how criminals, how, for example, in Nordic countries, how they think of crime and the idea of punishment. They actually don't think of it in terms of punishment. They think of it in terms of how can we rehabilitate, provide an atmosphere where this person can be rehabilitated in some way so that they will feel good about doing good and feel stronger about the effects of doing good than they do about taking something that doesn't belong to them, even if it's a life. And I've never heard anybody over here in this country even refer to how criminal, how the prison systems work in other countries. I just don't hear that. Why? We need to learn from what other countries do too. We don't have all the answers.
Well, certainly not. It's really heartbreaking, actually, when I hear you talk about that approach to criminal justice, because it's so different here. And the term criminal justice even annoys me so much, because it's not about either, you know, it's not about criminals and it's not about justice. I just finished a novel called The Reformatory, which looks at juvenile justice. And one of the things that kept me going, even though it's set in 1950, is that these issues are ongoing and that we're still debating these things. And I think at the base of it, there's such a dehumanization in our criminal justice system that whether it's the police officer on the street or the judge on the bench, they have othered the people who are brought before them and don't see their humanity. We have to look no further than the way prisoners have been treated during the COVID pandemic. And it extends also to people who work in the prisons. They're also not getting well cared for. You're all in that cage together and people don't see it. So if there's one thing I'm trying to hold out hope for, to return to our topic, is that we do, as you say, take into account what other countries are doing. Our numbers are way over bloated, rooted in Jim Crow. We have to do a reset on our whole idea of crime and punishment that takes humanity into account. We are all people.
Absolutely.
I really don't want to move on from this conversation. However, I'm hoping we'll have a moment to come back together, but time is waning, and I do want to have an opportunity to share, to invite Kevin Kane and to share the work that our middle school students have been doing on this very question of hope. Not our middle school students, yes, ours. Students, don't go away. Friends, family, community, colleagues, peers, please stay. We're going to just do this a little differently this evening. So stay where you are. It gives me great pleasure to share the screen with my colleague, Kevin Kane, and who is the director of our Visual and Performing Arts Education Program, which is an academic minor in our school and an extraordinary connector to Los Angeles schools. Kevin's going to provide a little background about our special partnership with students from Marina Del Rey Middle School, and then we'll all come back again together after he shares their work with us. Kevin, welcome again. The screen is yours.
Thanks, Vic, and thanks to this wonderful panel. Very inspiring. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Kane, as Vic just said, director of UCLA's Visual and Performing Arts Education Program, otherwise known as VAPA. It brings me great pleasure to be here again with you all tonight on this election eve to share an additional dose of hope, which I'm sure we all could use at this point. This year, VAPA is partnering with the 10 Questions program to expand its reach deeper into the community by inviting middle and high school students from 5 Los Angeles public schools to engage in the program. Each cohort of students has been invited to have their own classroom conversations and create art in response to one of the 10 questions for a total of 5 presentations. This is of course done with the help of their teacher, their classroom teacher, and our VAPA program. We share the work with the faculty panelists who are responding to that question and with the UCLA students who are enrolled in this course, also thinking about these interrogations. And we also want to share this extraordinary work with you, the public. So if you were here 2 weeks ago, you had a chance to see the incredible work from the LACHSA, LA County High School for the Arts. The theater students created a beautiful piece in response to the question, what is power? Tonight, it brings me great pleasure to first welcome the grade 7 and 8 dance company students from Marina Del Rey Middle School and share some beautiful choreographic works they created in response to tonight's question, what is hope? Looking to our youth for their particular type of wisdom, creativity, and generosity. These younger students were asked to reflect on that big question, both in writing and through dance, movement, and gesture. They started with hand dances and eventually explored their responses in a full-bodied way. I think you'll see that the hand motifs remain throughout the video collage as both a transitional device and a metaphor for hope, that which connects the past to the present to the future. I need to mention their teacher, a wonderful teacher named Ms. Lindsay Farris, a veteran dance educator and herself an alumna of the School of the Arts and Architecture, the UCLA World Arts and Cultures dance program, as a matter of fact. Ms. Farris says the following about the opportunity of her students to work on this question. There is nothing more powerful than the freedom to create. In my class, we use dance as a primary language for inspiring others, challenging perspectives, and sharing stories of hope. My hope was to ignite a sense of self-discovery within each dancer so they could grow in curiosity, courage, and confidence. The opportunity to hope is a powerful catalyst for change. It is also a powerful tool for self-preservation in an unprecedented time of social isolation. So in the video collage you're about to see, the Marina Del Rey Middle School company will dance a collection of movement stories, sharing their hope for themselves and our world. I hope you enjoy what they've created.
Hope to me is believing in yourself and the world around you, no matter what condition you're in. I have hope for many things in life, such as racism ending. I wake up every morning and my family and friends remain safe and healthy. This world nowadays needs to have hope in our society, because if not, our world isn't going to stand for long.
Hope smells like roses and feels like happiness. Hope to me is knowing or having faith that something good will happen to you or others. I don't always have hope, but I'm learning how to see the good in people in the world.
Hope can improve our lives. Envisioning a better future motivates us to take the steps to make it happen.
Sometimes, hope doesn't always come when you want it to. My life wasn't always easy. The parents that I have today aren't my birth parents. They were my foster parents until they officially adopted me. But I'm very hopeful with the family I have. Hope is family, love, and support. Hope is feeling like you can do anything in the world. The feeling of freedom.
Hope is finally seeing the good in a bad cause. Hope looks like victory to me. Hope feels like being better than how you were before. Hope sounds like winning or drawing. Everybody needs hope. Even if you think you don't, you do. It's for the better and it's for you.
Hope is linking the past and present to the future. It is having the vision that what you hope for will actually happen.
My hope is that we stop all this pain and violence and live equally.
Hope is the little moments. The moments where you laugh, where you cry tears of joy, where you're happy, where you're doing things that you most love.
Hope, to me, is like a light through my body that I'm trying to reach, but can't, because there's always something in my mind that blocks it. And things go through my mind, but I fight it and find that light again. Hope is love, it's life, it's me, it's anything you want it to be.
Hope to me is family or love, because hope, family, and love are three good things.
Though all those things are happening, instead of running away and trying to end them in a bad way, you run towards them and overcome them and wait for things to get better. Don't make a permanent solution to a problem that is only temporary.
Hope is having the power of choice. I chose the unique path because it allows me to utilize my creative abilities. Creativity is a big impact on a person's mind and body. Creativity means to have a wide range of ideas that are very different in many different ways. This is a powerful, powerful hope to own.
Hope is God's protection. Every day, I ask Him for protection over me and my loved ones. My hope is that I find a good education so I can get to my dream job. Everyone has hopes, but hope requires hard work. Not everything is handed to you. I have to chase my hopes and dreams with effort.
Just beautiful work, students, beautiful work. So amazing. I actually think so much of what you all said was in direct conversation with our panelists this evening. In fact, they mirrored so many of the same ideas that I heard in conversation. So thanks, a big congratulations to Marina Del Rey Middle School dance composition students, many of whom are in attendance tonight. So shout out and hello, along with your wonderful teacher, Ms. Ferris. Worth mentioning that these dance students, as well as all the local youth that we're working with on this project, are working from their homes, which was obvious in this video. They're never actually working with each other or Ms. Ferris in the same space, which is particularly difficult when creating a group choreographic piece. But you all did a beautiful, beautiful job. It was beautifully realized, cohesive, and yes, hopeful. So I want to thank these young women for their beautiful work. I want to thank Ms. Ferris again. It's a privilege to continue to work with teachers all throughout the city who are making beautiful connections with their students despite all the obstacles that they're facing. For those of you in the room who want to take a deeper look or a deeper dive into the work we do in VAPA, visit our website, vapa.ucla.edu, or follow us on Instagram at UCLAVAPAE. Maybe some students in the room might also want to think about taking some of our classes. Our next collaboration will be next Monday, November 9th, when the media arts students from Venice High School share their response to the question, what is resilience? So I hope you'll tune in to that as well. So for now, I'd like to pass it back to Vic and our other panelists to take some questions to work with the audience as well. Enjoy the rest of the evening and thank you. One more time, thank you, Marina Del Rey Middle School. Beautiful.
Yes, thank you, Marina Del Rey Middle School. And you know that if we were in a theater together, it would be a standing ovation. So you can't hear the applause, but know that it's there. And of course, the future looks so much better when it's in your hands. I want to invite our esteemed guests back. This evening somewhat escaped from us, but not without having done extraordinary things together. And I just wanted to leave a little time for the three of you to just, what is it you would like to share with us as we close up the evening? And before you do that, I want to say, I know that usually we have time for questions and discussion. And what I want to propose is that those of you who have questions for our guests, that you stay with us after the show is done and go back to the backstage, which is really here anyway, except that you'll turn on your videos, just raise your hand and say that you have a question. Come with us backstage. There'll probably be a smaller group of us and we can talk a little bit then when we're done. But right now, for those of you who are here, I want to give the stage back to Tananarive, Ramesh, and Herbie, and just allow you to find some closure for this evening together. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're all sort of stunned watching the beautiful dances and the words from the young people, their resilience to jump ahead in theme and learning dance virtually. So that's also beautiful. And I saw a lot of the people commenting how my faith in humanity is restored. I mean, we have to remember that that is what this is all about. Back to those words by Angela Davis, my mother probably didn't expect to live to see perfection in terms of what she wanted from race relations. I would venture a guess that none of us will, but we work for the next generation and we each roll that rock farther and farther up the mountain.
Yeah, and we can also see just how in our youth we are being taught something. Yes. By the authenticity, the humanity, and how real it all is. Well, authenticity, and just and when I think a lot of what we were touching on earlier is sort of about how honest do we want to be with our own feelings, or how much do we choose to put those away having faith in others, having belief in others, or how much do we choose to put those away with the blockages of manipulation and fear? You know? And so just that video was so amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah, it was so inspiring, and their words demonstrated that they know hope takes effort. You know, I heard one of the dancers say that, and that's so true. And much of what they said, and how the choreography blended with their words was, I mean, I didn't expect to hear that from people that are that young, you know. I mean, they're a lot more advanced than what I was prepared to hear from them. And that's what gives me hope, because they are the ones that will be carving out the future for humanity.
And I also want to say, as someone who's taught undergraduate courses at UCLA for, I believe, 15 years, that my graduate students as well, I see us all as in community. I follow the model of praxis as an educator, where we're collectively producing knowledge rather than me transmitting something to others. But I do want to say that, like, we saw these amazing middle school students, but like our undergrads, like by and large, like I've taught 15 years of undergraduate courses, are super inspiring, and they get it. They get a lot of this. And I think it's often, I saw a bunch of questions being like, well, if we all get it, why are things so messed up? Fair enough. But because we have systems in place that are the opposite of emancipatory. But within our humanity, and even within us as Americans, we are emancipatory. And so the question is how do we challenge those systems? And I think about that with my students who go into massive amounts of student loan debt. When I did my doctorate, I had a lot of friends at the Harvard Law School. Almost all of them were down with like human rights, civil rights, environmental justice, etc. You know what, like most of them ended up doing? They worked on Wall Street and other places like that, etc. And why? Because they had $150,000 to $200,000 of student debt at massive interest rates. So that's not because of those people, it's because of these systems. And so we have an opportunity to challenge those systems. Certainly, I felt that the Sanders campaign was representative of that, but I also believe that that can occur with the Biden-Harris administration. I really do believe that.
Well, one thing I want to mention also is that hope takes courage. It takes courage. I mean, someone like you, Ramesh, you know better than anyone. No, this is not where we thought the election was going. We've embraced a candidate, right? But long time back, that this wasn't how we pictured it. But to also hold hope that this different way can also help accomplish goals that many of us hold dear. It takes courage to cast a ballot when you've been burned, when you feel like efforts will be suppressed, ballots will be thrown out, your voice will not be appreciated by the people who court you, all that. It takes a lot of courage to have hope. And I have to co-sign with what you said about the UCLA students. I am constantly inspired by my undergraduates. They've taught me a great deal, made me more courageous as someone embracing film, as a writer, just why not? And that's a part of hope too, as Herbie Hancock knows, is innovation.
Oh yeah, we have to be on our toes. But I was just thinking that so many of the things that we're staring at, because they're so illuminated now at this time, those things have been in place for years.
And I think
what made them so illuminated now is because of the situations that have opened Pandora's box. But if Pandora's box has been there and it's hiding, you don't get rid of it until you open the box and see what the problems are. So the good news is that it lets us see how deep we have to go into, for example, slavery, to see the offshoots of it in so many ways that I'm Black, and I didn't even realize the extent of how slavery was carried, the end results were carried into today with the diets of Black people, with and the kind of food we've chosen to eat in a lot of cases, but a lot of it stems from back in those days, you know. The mortality rate with, you know, birth of children. And actually, I didn't even know that statistic until now. I mean, so in other words, there's so many things that are being brought to the surface, and so many white people that are asking me questions now. I've been hearing about, we got to get the conversation going. I've been hearing that since 6-7 years ago. I haven't heard the conversation start until now.
Mm. Yeah,
that's positive. Nothing happens until people start asking questions, and they're asking questions about themselves.
Yeah, I feel like climate crises, pandemic crises, neo-fascism, which we are staring in the face.
Yes.
All of them put spotlights on so much that we took for granted, and then we said, "Oh, it's okay, it's America. We'll you know, rags to riches." All of this.
Yeah.
Civil, massive racial injustice, the brutality of being able to see all of this, you know, in front of us. It shines spotlights on our deeply unequal country, and that is not resolved, you know, per some of the comments by Biden and Harris. It's resolved through mass social movements that influence Biden and Harris to make change, and our local leaders, and our hopefully new DA, and so on. You know, like that's how it happens, and that's how it's always happened. If you look at the history of this country, you think this country, like what did it look like 50 years ago?
Right, exactly. Well, you just pointed up a point I wanted to bring up, and that is a lot of white people have a fear because they're going to be in the minority for the first time in the history of this country. They may not even realize that's in concrete fashion. I don't mean every white person, but I mean some white people have this fear that's rising up in them, because within the next 20 years, they will be in the minority.
Yeah,
that's something none of us ever thought about. We were just wherever we were. But now things are beginning to evolve, beginning to change. And this turning of things is so healthy for our inner humanity, which is, we're all the same people. Every person outside of me is in me, right? We're all inside of each other too. We have that connection. And so all of these things impact all of us in ways that we can't see. But I have more hope now than I think I've ever had in my life. And these are the worst times I've ever lived in, right?
That's how it has to go sometimes.
Yep.
I think I have more hope at the end of this evening for certain than I did when we joined together earlier. And I thought initially, question of hope was really about an election, and it is. It's about voting and all of that, but it's so clear as we leave this evening together that it's a much longer road, and that it is about all of us being awake and open to taking responsibility for our futures. And to you young women who danced for us, It's not only that the future is good in your hands, but the poignancy and the challenges of your life ahead makes our work all the more important right now. On behalf of you, on behalf of all of us. So what an extraordinary evening this has been. Thank you, Herbie, Tananarive, Ramesh. Oh, if we could only continue. I just want to say before we leave that next week, we're going to know a few different things, maybe not very many different things than we know now. But we will be considering the question, what is resilience? So not even time for fatigue. We go on, we act towards our future together. We're going to end now. You can learn more about 10 questions at UCLA Arts /10 questions. And if you have a question for our extraordinary panelists, I think they're going to hang around with us just a little bit longer so that we can meet all in the same frame together on Zoom. Please raise your hand and also turn your video on if you're going to stay. Otherwise, good night, everyone. Let's make this future together, and until soon.